The music on the countdown was 1945 by Anthony Brown's Asian American Orchestra, featuring the poem August 6 by the late Janice Midikitani. Good evening. My name is Kenji Tagama of the Nichibei Foundation, publishers of the Nichibei Weekly, Japanese American community newspaper. On behalf of the Nichibei Foundation and the Friends of Hibakusha, I'd like to welcome you to a Remembrance for Peace, commemorating Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
My name is Jerry Honda of the Friends of Hibakusha, which was developed 40 years ago as a support group for atomic bomb survivors. This includes supporting the biannual medical visits by doctors from Japan to perform checkups on hibakusha in America. We are proud to present to you this wonderful program featuring an interfaith ceremony, the interaction of hibakusha and their descendants through a moving Lanterns of Remembrance ceremony, the reading of a young person's essay on visiting Hiroshima, and the presentation of an Academy Award-nominated film, The Mushroom Club by Steven Okazaki.
We present this deeply meaningful program to honor the hibakusha, who bear witness to the devastation of nuclear destruction. As we continue to lose our beloved hibakusha, we wanted to offer a solemn occasion to reflect upon the dangers of nuclear devastation and the urgent need for peace in these turbulent times. The world has not witnessed a nuclear attack in 77 years, largely due to the collective voice of the hibakusha. But as you know, there are current challenges to world peace, as witnessed by conflicts in Ukraine and around the world. So it is important for us to be vigilant. This is what makes today's program all the more important, to educate ourselves by listening to those with the moral authority to tell us firsthand about the dangers of nuclear holocaust.
On behalf of the Friends of Hibakusha, we would like to acknowledge the community of support received over the past 40 years to help support hibakusha residing in the United States. FOH has been involved in supporting American hibakusha through our association with the Committee of Atomic Bomb Survivors in the USA by encouraging the sharing of their stories, co-hosting biannual medical visits, collaborating with other supporting organizations and community groups in providing educational forums, film screenings and exhibitions, and commemorative programs in a humanitarian effort to promote a more peaceful world without the threat of more nuclear weapons. The hibakusha are the last witnesses to the tragic and traumatic consequences of a nuclear holocaust. The heartfelt message shared by all hibakusha, as well as their families and descendants, and by all of us, is the impact that nuclear warfare will have upon the future of our children and our planet, and our pleas for continuing world peace. We'd like to start off today's program with an interfaith ceremony to remember the victims of the atomic bombings, led by the Japanese American Religious Federation of San Francisco. We will start with a brief opening message by Reverend Gary Barbary, a retired Methodist minister and president of the Japanese American Religious Federation of San Francisco, followed by Reverend Joanne Tolosa and Reverend Ellen Matsui of the Konko Church of San Francisco, and Reverend Elaine Nolan of the Buddhist Church of San Francisco.
This ceremony was recorded at the beginning of the annual Nihonmachi Street Fair on Saturday, August 6th. We thank the ministers of the Japanese American Religious Federation for their spiritual leadership and collaboration. Please feel free to offer your own prayer or thoughts for peace in whatever way you feel comfortable with.
every year we do an observance of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombing because it's such an emotional, impactful date for our community. And so this year we had planned one for August the 6th, today, the anniversary of the first bombing in Nagasaki, in Hiroshima. And we were invited by the Japantown Cultural District and Nihonmachi Street Fair to do a public observance today here at the Peace Plaza. We were very happy to do that. This is the first section of our 4-day observance of the anniversary, and there will be a live streaming at 6 o'clock on the 9th of August in the anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing, and that will be live streamed by the Nichibei Foundation and Friends of Hibakusha, and information is on our flyer. We will be doing a water pouring ceremony that we have developed over the years, and the public is invited to participate at the end of our presentation.
Good morning still, everyone. I'm with the Konko Church of San Francisco, the head minister, and with me is Reverend Alan Matsui, associate minister, and we'll be doing our purification blessing.
Please bow your heads. Let us purify ourselves by letting go of our negative thoughts and emotions. Let us open our spiritual hearts to the way of the universe, feel deep appreciation for the gifts of life, and express our gratitude by honoring and fulfilling the memories and wishes of those that are here to commemorate this event. Please bow your heads. Thank you.
Main prayer. Dear Divine Universal Parent, at this Hiroshima and Nagasaki A-bomb commemoration, we deeply thank you for your unconditional love, infinite blessings, and our precious gift of life. We, the Japanese American Religious Federation of San Francisco, offer our hearts in prayer as we remember all the lives lost on August 6th and 9th respectively, 77 years ago, who were exposed to the radiation fatally or with lifelong ailments, which in turn may have affected their descendants and generations to come. Especially as more precarious relationships between countries have developed, including between the superpowers. A nuclear war to devastate our dear planet Earth and all people throughout the world hangs over us. Let us all awaken and learn from these irreversible, annihilating mistakes. Dear atomic bomb-related ancestral spirits, including Reverend Mrs. Fumiko Matsui and Sisters May Hartman and Kei Yoshioka, we continue to deeply fondly miss you and express our love and apology and sincere prayers for your eternal peace and happiness now and always. You will be remembered eternally. May the strong voices of your descendants and future generations worldwide carry on your message to end the production and use of nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Dear Universal Parent Kami and ancestral spirits, please continue to protect us, guide us, and enrich us. May we never lose the way of faith that is handed down to all generations. Sincerely help one another and choose to live in a world of peace, cooperation, and harmony. Reflecting your love and caring in all we do. Hearts one with you. Hibakusha no Mikama no Kami-sama, arigatou gozaimasu. Mikama no Kami-sama, osewa ni natte orimasu. Now give the offering of sacred evergreen branch. Sacred evergreen branch represents the purity and sincerity of
In the Christian scriptures and Jewish scriptures, there is a story of the complete destruction of the earth. And it's the story of Noah and the flood. At the end of that story, when one family is rescued, God does a sign that is a sign of God's own disarmament. And in this day when we remember and resolve to be engaged in peacemaking and into the disarmament of the nations, I'd like to read the passage about God's covenant. This is a story about disarmament. It's in the 9th chapter of the book of Genesis, starting at the 8th verse. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I established my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and with you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will look upon it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I've established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." For years and years and years, I knew this story and read this story, and every time I would see a rainbow, like everyone who sees a rainbow breaking through the storm, we get a sense of uplift and a sense of blessing. In this story, what we're told is that blessing is God's armament hanging in the sky. It's God's bow, from the bow and arrow, the weapons that military soldiers use to kill their enemies. God has hung his bow in the heavens so that there never again will be an attack upon the people of the planet. Will you pray with me in your hearts? Oh, gracious God, on this day of solemn remembrance, we especially are in mind of those persons who were in Hiroshima and 4 days later in Nagasaki. Those families who have been destroyed and affected by the impact for multiple generations, we remember this day, and we restore our own commitment to peacemaking and to disarmament of the nations. We ask, O Lord, that you bless our gathering here as a community, that we not pass through this day unmarked, but we restore our sense of hope and connection. Amen.
Good afternoon. My name is Elaine Donlin from the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, and I'd like to begin with a reading from the late Buddhist Dharma teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who was very intimate with the horror of war in his home country of Vietnam. He says, "We often think of peace as the absence of war, that if powerful countries would reduce their weapon arsenals, we could have peace. But if we look deeply into the weapons, we see our own minds, our own prejudices, fears, and ignorance. Even if we transport all the bombs to the moon, the roots of war and the roots of bombs are still there in our hearts and minds, and sooner or later we will make new bombs. To work for peace is to uproot war from ourselves and from the hearts of men and women. To prepare for war, to give millions of men and women the opportunity to practice killing day and night in their hearts, is to plant millions of seeds of violence, anger, frustration, and fear that will be passed on for generations to come. This is the 77th anniversary of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945, where upwards of 226,000 people, mostly civilians, including women and children, were killed or later died from the nuclear blast. Here we are 77 years later, and we still haven't stopped the hatred, prejudices, and violent acts that precipitated the events of those fateful days. In our Jodo Shinshu founder, Shinran Shonin, aspired for a world of peace and harmony, pleading, "May the Buddha Dharma spread, and may the world be at peace." And still today, in 2022, We, along with survivors of those horrific bombings, aspire for a world of peace and harmony. May the experiences and memories of those who survived that day be the words of wisdom to the whole world as they implore all of humanity to live in peace and harmony. May peace prevail. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida.
In Japan, it is said that the spirits of our ancestors come back annually to visit us for several days around July 15th. Some regions of Japan also light bonfires, so the ancestors will find their way home to visit their families, while other areas make paper lanterns, or Toro, that are cast down the river with names of those who have passed away or a message for them to read. Each lantern has a family name in Japanese, along with specific persons they are remembering on this occasion.
First, we're honored to have Jack Dairiki, a hibakusha from Hiroshima, representing the Dairiki family and all victims of atomic bombs, to float 2 lanterns. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance in honor of her brother Yoshikatsu Fukuta, a Hiroshima hibakusha, is Seiko Fujimoto, herself a hibakusha or atomic bomb survivor from Hiroshima. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance for Kyoko Hanaoka, a Nagasaki hibakusha, is Reverend Gary Barbary. Reverend Barbary is also offering a lantern for Kazuko Hanaoka, a Nagasaki hibakusha. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance for his mother, the late Reverend Fumiko Matsui of the Konko Church of San Francisco, a Hiroshima hibakusha, is Reverend Alan Matsui at the Konko Church of San Francisco. Next, offering the lantern of remembrance for both Mei Okubo Hartman and her sister Kei Okubo Yoshioka, 2 members of the Konko Church, former members of the Konko Church of San Francisco, is Reverend Joanne Tolosa, head minister of the Konko Church of San Francisco. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance for her father, Atsushi Endo, a Hiroshima hibakusha, is Nina Kadera. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance for Ken Nakano, a Hiroshima hibakusha, as well as her late husband Sueharu Fujimoto, also a Hiroshima hibakusha, is Seiko Fujimoto, assisted by Jerry Honda of Friends of Hibakusha. Next, offering a lantern of remembrance for her late husband Robert Ruski, a longtime Friends of Hibakusha president, is his widow, Karen Kai, also a member of Friends of Hibakusha. Offering a lantern of remembrance for Michiko Tatsuguchi, a Hiroshima hibakusha, is her daughter Suzanne Yoshi. Suzanne is joined tonight by her daughters Michi Yoshi Nguyen and Sachi Yoshi, and her fiance Eric Fuller, as well as her husband Reverend Michael Yoshi.
Next, we have Kota and Yuta Suzuki in Sendai, Japan, presenting a lantern in remembrance of their great-uncle, Yoshikatsu Fukuta.
Next, we would like to introduce the reading of an essay by Daisy Okazaki, daughter of award-winning filmmaker Steven Okazaki, that was published by Afar. In her essay, accompanied by some of her artwork, Daisy, a student at Pitzer College, describes a visit to Hiroshima she experienced a few years ago. The essay is entitled, "In Hiroshima, Japan, a Teenager Finds an Unexpected Home."
On August 6th, I get up at 6 a.m., eat a yellow kiwi, rummage around in my suitcase for an umbrella, and then head to the Peace Park for the memorial of the 75th anniversary of the bombing. I stop by the burial mound for a ceremony for the victims who were never identified. Men and women file up to an altar to say a prayer or make an offering. At 7 a.m., I walk to the A-bomb dome, the only building near the bomb's hypocenter left standing. The area is packed with people. Protesters holding colorful banners stand in front of a makeshift stage. Monks sit on the ground, hitting a steady beat on small drums. Reporters mill around with cameras. Police officers in riot gear close ranks around the crowds. I weave through and take a seat directly in front of the dome. Speakers talk about nuclear war and the need for disarmament, their voices ringing through megaphones. The tail end of a typhoon is passing over Hiroshima, and soon it begins to rain. People raise their umbrellas, creating a sort of canopy as the big drops fall. Then suddenly it is silent. A clock strikes 8:15, the drums stop. At this exact moment, 74 years ago, the world's first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Everyone looks to the sky over the river. Peace activists lie on the ground pretending to be dead. I think of the flash, of the heat, of the fire. And then, like a heartbeat, the drums start again and the moment passes. Later that night, I take an hour off work at the cafe and walk to the banks of one of the rivers that run through the park. Visitors from all over the world have gathered to float candlelit paper lanterns across the water, an annual Hiroshima tradition to honor the dead. By the time I arrive, the lines to buy lanterns snake through the park and into the street, so instead I buy an onigiri at 7-Eleven and sit on a wooden plank next to the water. The lanterns are bright shades of green, red, blue, yellow, purple, and orange. Light dances across the surface of the water as they bob. Men sitting on paddleboards sail among them, occasionally scooping up sinking lanterns. One man has set up a chair on his board, and I can hear a portable radio as he paddles past. After a while, I get up to leave. I shuffle across a bridge through groups of tourists and watch the lanterns disappear down the river, little souls floating away. The next day, I ride the streetcar to the ant office where Tomoko-san introduces me to a man named Shozo Kawamoto. In his mid-80s, he wears wireframe glasses with slightly tinted lenses and a nicely ironed light turquoise button-down shirt under a blue vest. Tomoko-san sets out a plate of individually wrapped biscuits and motions for me to sit down as Kawamoto-san shares his story. He was 10 years old when the bomb was dropped, but he wasn't in the city. Fearing the heavy firebombing that other Japanese cities suffered during the war, Kawamoto-san and many other young children had been evacuated to the mountains in the countryside. He had been living in a temple there for several months before August 6th. 3 days later, he returned to a city in ruins. He lost his father, mother, older brother, younger brother, and sister. Of his immediate family, only he and his older sister survived. They were able to make their way to what he described as a safe house near the train station, where they stayed for about 6 months until his sister died from leukemia caused by radiation. Kawamoto-san was alone. His relatives refused to help him. After the war, hibakusha were treated horribly, denied medical care, food, jobs, and housing. Their mysterious diseases were thought to be contagious. Those who were disfigured were shunned. Japan as a whole pushed them away. He was eventually taken in by a village official from a nearby town and lived there for 10 years, working as a shoyu maker. He fell in love with a girl who he hoped to marry, but because he was a hibakusha, her family refused to let them. Hurt and lonely, he left the life he had built and returned to Hiroshima, where he became a member of the Yakuza. He didn't tell me much about what happened during that period of his life, but as time passed, he was consumed with guilt over what he'd done. So he moved again to Okayama and found a job at a small bento box manufacturing company. Afraid of discrimination, he kept the fact that he was a hibakusha a secret. He remembered his mother talking to him as a child about the importance of kindness and honesty, and that inspired him. He worked hard, and by the age of 50, he was made president of the company. Around that time, an old classmate contacted Kawamoto-san and asked him to come back to Hiroshima. Kawamoto-san visited the Peace Park and heard the stories of the dead. He realized he had to share his story of survival and perseverance. Kawamoto-san falls silent, nodding slowly to himself. Then he reaches into a paper bag, pulls out an origami crane he had folded, a symbol of peace and healing in Hiroshima, and gives it to me. At Sunday on August 9th, I meet Tomoko-san at the aunt office, and we walk together down to the river. It's my final day in Hiroshima. The following morning, I will catch the Nozomi bullet train back to Tokyo, but today we're meeting to honor the anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki, which happened 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima. Tomoko-san leads me towards a group of people gathered on the shore. We watch as they light candles in small glass jars and place them by the water, a memorial to the lives lost 75 years ago. We get our own candles and place them by the others before sitting down on a ledge above the river bank to watch the sun sink below the skyline, leaving behind streaks of pink and purple. As the sky begins to darken, I notice the outline of the Orizuru Tower behind the Peace Park. On my first day here, Tomoko-san took me to the top so I could see a panoramic view of the city. She told me that Hiroshima has a spirit, a voice. I hadn't understood it then, hadn't experienced enough of the city and its inhabitants to grasp her meaning. At this moment, as I look around me, I think I finally understand what she meant. Candlelight mixes with the lights of the surrounding buildings. It flickers on the carved signs of the park's stone memorials and on the surface of the river where people gather to mourn the dead. The light even reaches a willow marked with a small white sign, a hibakujimoku, or a tree that survived the bomb. Hiroshima is both the past and the present. It is unique and sad and beautiful. In the beginning, when I returned to my apartment by myself late at night, when I woke up to a missed call from my parents, I would feel suddenly very lonely and ache to go back to California. But as the days passed, that happened less and less. Sitting on an overpass in the rain, walking along the riverside, or serving people drinks at the cafe, I felt completely at ease. Through meeting people like Kawamoto-san, I was shown an experience, a story much larger than myself. This city still has a lot to teach me, and a lot to teach the world if it will listen, about peace, resilience, and respect for our past. I want to do whatever I can to spread those messages. When I first arrived, I had begun to believe that as a Japanese American, between America and Japan, there wasn't any place where I belonged. But living in Hiroshima, listening to the voice of the city, and bearing witness to its story, I realized that I was wrong. While one trip can't solve the complex relationship that I have with my identity, no matter where I go, Hiroshima will always be one of the places I can call home. And for now, that is enough.
Next, today's program, we will feature a brief interview by Academy Award-winning director Steven Okazaki, who created a trio of films on the experience of hibakusha: Survivors, The Mushroom Club, and White Light, Black Rain, the latter two being HBO productions. Steven was a founding member of Friends of Hibakusha, who went on to document the stories of the hibakusha.
In our interview, Steven discusses a journey documenting hibakusha stories, which was set up tonight's screening of The Mushroom Club, a short documentary that was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short Subject. The film will be screened immediately after the interview. The Mushroom Club is a filmmaker's journey to Hiroshima 60 years after the bomb. Steven Okazaki, who first visited the city in 1980, takes a very personal look at Hiroshima, the place, the people, the historical event, the idea. He gathers a compelling collection of everyday images, a class photo, a spool of thread, a handful of buttons, and the powerful stories that come with them.
Initially, I was just going to do the film focused on American hibakusha, and that's the first film, Survivors, which was broadcast in 1982. But when I was doing the film, a group in Hiroshima raised some money for the film, and they said, you have to come to Japan to get the check. I said, well, can't you just send it? And they said, no, you have to come on August 6th. And we'll give you the check. So I went on August 6th and saw the memorial services. And so I pulled in deeper. Well, the Mushroom Club is just really personal. Since I didn't have a big budget from PBS or NHK or HBO, it's just you work within your budget. And so my wife Peggy and I were in Hiroshima, and we did casual interviews with people and told the story that way. But it's Mushroom Club is sort of my feelings about Hiroshima, and some of them are mixed. This film looks at sort of different sides of the story. I would just say, it's just my personal way of looking at Hiroshima for me. And so I just pulled together some stories that I had sort of collected and connections that I had collected and made the Mushroom Club. And the Mushroom Club was really a sort of culmination of people and stories that really struck me over the previous 10 years. I'm not really that interested in the history. I'm interested in the people's stories. And if they aren't being told, it's just an extraordinary opportunity, to tell some people's stories for the first time and introduce them to an audience for the first time that's never heard them. It's really a gift. You can take your skill as a filmmaker, as an interviewer, and you connect it to this subject, which is has a lot of weight to it, and you have to, handle it with respect, but then you pass it along to the viewer, and something special can happen. I just make, the film, and people can come away with their own lessons. And I try not to have a sort of prescribed goal, except tell the story as well as I can. I spent a lot of time in Hiroshima and traveled there since 1980 numerous times, and it's kind of just my journal for how I see the city and the people there. And I always think Hiroshima kind of looks like every Japanese city, but the same department stores, the same 7-Elevens and stuff. But Hiroshima is kind of special, and it's odd. You're walking by and you're coming out of the 7-Eleven, and there'll just be a little plaque, on the ground or on the wall that says, this is the whole block of a certain business of shopkeepers disappeared in the bombing, and I don't know how it will be in the future with next generations, but the people there, it's really. And there's more people from outside moving to Hiroshima for businesses that have nothing to do with the bomb. But, there are people there, and it's kind of remarkable that the story of the bombing is kind of really part of their life and in their hearts, and they want to share that. And it just, it makes it kind of special. Hiroshima politically really is very liberal, but socially it's very conservative. And, people are very conscious of what people will think of you. And the hibakusha had really were socially ostracized in so many ways, in every way, employment, marriage, the church, everything. So I always found it really difficult to talk to Hiroshima survivors. You had to really pull their stories out. And they often had thought, sort of just said things that they thought was safe. When I'm showing the films, I sometimes try to remind the audience that this is not about all Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors. This is a film reflecting the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors who want to tell their stories, that there are so many stories that haven't been told, and those are the really difficult ones. And so I met a lot of hibakusha who had the most extraordinary stories, and on the day of filming, they wouldn't open their door. And those were really painful because you just thought you hadn't heard these stories where people were really driven to the point of madness, really. And I think some of the people were, even 50 years after the bomb, on the sort of edge of madness. But those people, again, you don't see or get to meet. And then other people, went through just unimaginable experience, and they were totally open. And I think that for me is the real reason I've felt passionately about the subject, because it's just given me so much. I mean, you hang out with people who have been through the unimaginable. They have a bowl of cereal in the morning, they go, this is what a great bowl of, what a great breakfast. They have this appreciation for life. So when I complain about a crappy breakfast, I always think, well, for me, that's been the lesson. I mean, the people that survive really have, from that moment, that it taught them that they have to treasure everything, This is a typical Sunday afternoon in Yoyogi Park in Tokyo. I'm in Japan to make a film about Hiroshima, 60 years after the bomb. Hiroshima is 550 miles south of Tokyo, exactly 3 hours and 52 minutes on the bullet train. The atomic bomb was dropped on August 6, 1945. 110,000 people were killed almost instantly, with tens of thousands more dying in the years that followed. Hiroshima today, population 1 million, is not a picturesque city. Like the rest of Japan, it was rebuilt quickly, over and over. It is like most big cities, crowded, noisy, with too many cars. Culturally and socially, the population is conservative. Politically, it is progressive, the opposite of Tokyo. In the center of the city between two rivers is the Peace Park, built in 1955 as a memorial to the people who died in the bombing. It features the atomic dome, one of the few buildings left standing. It is a place of reflection and meditation. There are numerous statues and memorials. The most popular is the Children's Peace Monument, inspired by Sadako, a 12-year-old girl who died of leukemia caused by radiation exposure. All over Japan, school children fold paper cranes for peace and come to Hiroshima to present them at Sadako's monument. This is the hopeful image that Hiroshima presents to the world. As true as that image is, so is the fact that it is starting to break down. The meditative mood of the park is now disrupted by the sounds of jet skis and J-pop music. As the city grows around it, the Peace Park feels like it is shrinking. Recently, vandals poured red paint on the cenotaph, where the names of the dead are kept. And citizens were shocked when a student from a prominent family set fire to Sadako's paper cranes. After the war, the word peace was almost sacred to the people of Hiroshima. These days, not everyone shares that reverence.
深夜になる広島市民の皆様、こちらは6月1日、2日の
Vehicles with blacked out windows roll down Peace Boulevard, blaring nationalist messages about returning the country to its militaristic past. Everyone ignores them, but the issue has become real since Japanese troops were mobilized to Iraq, marking the first time since World War II that Japan has sent a military force into another country. I first learned about Hiroshima from a comic book called Barefoot Gen by Keiji Nakazawa. He was 6 years old when the atomic bomb killed his father, brother, and sister. He survived by sheer luck, bending down to pick up a rock. Nakazawa has devoted his life to telling the Hiroshima story through comic books and animated movies.
人間っていうのは今度忘れっぽくて非常に風化していくのが当たり前みたいなんですけど、僕は広島に行ってね、広島人がね、もうあんなエレジーはもうやめてくれと、これかなり知識のある人がそういうことを平然と言うわけですよ。僕はものすごい腹が立ちましてね、広島で語るのは何だと、私がもう原爆を語るしかないじゃないかという。
The story of Hiroshima is a story of water. 7 rivers cut through the city. To survive, people had to cross them. Thousands jumped into the rivers or drank the water and died. And shortly after the bombing, a radioactive black rain fell on the city. Toshiko Saiki comes to the river to remember. She was a 25-year-old bride in 1945. She and her husband survived the bomb, but lost 21 relatives. She sees what no one else can. Even after 60 years, she finds mementos from the bombing among the river stones.
揚げ潮の時にどこからこのボタンは押し寄せてやってくるんかもわからないね。だから砂の上にこう砂の上をよく見て歩くとこのボタンが転がってるの、砂の上に。これ見てごらん。これは鉄が溶けとる。これはカーラね。カーラは屋根の上で並んでるからね。だからカーラが並んでいたところはこんなにどうもなっていないでしょ。これも瓦が焼けてこんなになってくっついちゃってね。掘ったら何が出てくるかわからなかったね。これはガラスね。物がこんなんなると人間はどうなるか。6日の3時頃に街に出てきたよね。もうたくさんの人が亡くなっててから苦しんでの。でも、私は自分の肉親を探すためにみんな置いて逃げたよね。私はいい人だと思ってた。ところが原爆が落ちて街の中でやっていけないことたくさんやったよね。
The Hiroshima story is still being excavated. Every few years, unmarked mass grave sites are discovered in and around the city. Recently, one was found in Shukian Gardens, the city's most popular park. A stone marker reads, "Comfort the souls of the victims." Death is an important part of Japanese life. Every year on the anniversary of the bombing, the dead are comforted with food, drink, and prayers. Buddhist, Shinto, Catholic, and Protestant prayers.
固くお断りいたします。またプレスカードなどをつけておられる報道機関の方も写真取材につきましては申し合わせ事項を厳守してください。
May I have your attention, please? This ceremony is being held to console the souls of the atomic bomb victims and to pray for the realization of everlasting world peace. Only those wearing the press card issued by Hiroshima City and a company armband are permitted to take photographs in the vicinity of the memorial cenotaph.
The city's official ceremony is a huge orchestrated event, drawing tourists, peace activists, media, and politicians. Many atomic bomb survivors find the official ceremony too formal and political, and most do not attend. Instead, they hold their own ceremonies. Across the street from the Peace Park is a memorial for a girls' high school. The school lost 676 students in the bombing. They were so close to the hypocenter that most of them were vaporized. With city and school records also destroyed, some still haven't been identified. "10,000 high school students in Hiroshima were mobilized to help Japan's desperate war effort, clearing fire lanes and working in factories. Michiko Yamaoka, a 15-year-old student at the time, was a volunteer at the telephone company.
だからこうやって見たら日陰を作ったわけよ。日が出て眩しいからこうやっただけ。であれやったらもうピカーって光っちゃったの。でと思ったらもう私の喋ってる顔がプーッと膨れたよね。私たちは働いてた女学校ね今の中学校だけど女学校働いてたのは電話局は爆心地から500メートルのところへ178名かな働きに行ってたんだから。で今生存してるのは私加えて27名しか生存してないんだから。
Although badly burned, Yamaoka managed to find her friend, and together they tried to escape the fires that engulfed the city.
それでこの川じゃないんですけどもう一つ川を渡らないと火のない山に逃げることできないので友達が川に入れ言ったんですけど川には人々が浮いてたもんで友達は目の前で飛び込みました。だからいまだに死骸が上がってきませんけどで単純な考えない川へ入ったら死ぬろうと思ったので 入らないで私は友達の置いて逃げました。これが一番私の悲しいことです。だから私は置いて逃げたと思ってます。私は母に会いたい一心で飛び込みませんでした。
Yamaoka had 27 operations to repair her face and to free her fingers, which were fused together. This is one of the city's many okonomiyaki shops. Okonomiyaki is a Hiroshima specialty. A cheap and hearty lunchtime meal, it is a post-war favorite from the days when the country was poor. Toshiko Kajiyama and her 3-year-old brother Hiroshi were among the thousands of children orphaned by the bomb. Their house collapsed and burned. They lost everything except each other and a spool of thread.
どうなんでしょう。おばが持ってたんですかね。そしておばが持ってたから、あ、これ母の名前だから私がもらい受けたんだと思います。もう古いことでちょっとどうしてかいうのは私が手元に持ってるのかちょっとよくわからないんですけど。まあ4歳だったからですね、断片的に覚えてるというのか、後から聞いた話を自分が覚えてるような気持ちになってるのかよくはわかりませんけど。
To survive, Kajiyama and Hiroshi were separated for many years. It's impossible to imagine how a 4-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy could live through this. A few years ago, Kajiyama and her brother, both with their own families, moved next door to each other, reuniting and living together for the first time since the bomb. Narumi and Toshiko are best friends and rarely apart. They are among the youngest of the survivors. They were 3 months in utero when their mothers were exposed to the bomb's radiation. Both are disabled with the mental capacity of 8-year-olds. Everyone thinks of them as children, even though they are nearly 60 years old.
それでこっちちょうどこっち向いてましたからね。でそこであんまり暑いもんですからね、汗拭きながらこうして外眺めてたらちょうどねこう出てちょうどあのぐらいいうところでB29が空襲警報解除になったのに、あれまだ B29が飛ぶよう思ってこうして見てたんですよ。そのね真っ赤な玉が落ちてくるんですよ。落ちてくるように見えたんですよね。あらなんかB29が爆弾落とした思うてね瞬間ですよ。そう思った瞬間にピカーッと光ってねそれでドーンいう歌のまでは覚えてます。それからどうなったか全然わからん。あれですよね。だからねこれがこういう内容のこの総統書みたいなあれがあるいうのを聞いたのはねこれが生まれてからみんなね古市の頃でもあれですよみんながもうピカの子じゃけね生まれたって元気に育ちせんよってみんな言いよったんです。
Narumi was born with microcephaly, an abnormal smallness of the head. Other physical abnormalities were also found among the children of the bomb. Hidden from the public, an unknown number of these children were born. Without medical attention or monetary assistance, their families struggled to take care of them. A young journalist named Minoru Omuta organized the children and their parents and lobbied for government assistance. The group is called Kinoko Kai, the Mushroom Club. Yuriko Hatanaka, 59 years old, has the mental capacity of a 2-year-old at best. Yuriko suffers from dementia. She cannot go to the bathroom unassisted and is completely dependent on her father, who makes a meager living as a barber.
生まれた時には非常にこう小さくてねほんま片手に乗るぐらいにこんなに小さかったでちょっと目にこれ500名かな600名かな500名って100名か300ぐらいまで来てね。
In 1947, the United States and Japan created a joint project to study the effects of radiation exposure, examining and following more than 100,000 survivors. The project is now called the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, with facilities in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Their studies show that survivors have extremely high rates of blood disorders, especially leukemia, and cancers, particularly thyroid, lung, and breast cancer. They also suffer from infertility and early menopause. Studies of the genetic effects on the children and the children of the children have been limited and inconclusive. The scientists and physicians initially kept the survivors in the dark, claiming they didn't want to alarm them. When Yuriko was diagnosed as microcephalic, Mr. Hatanaka asked for an explanation. A caseworker from the research project declared there was no evidence to connect her condition to radiation exposure. So her parents blamed themselves. It took 30 years for them to find out it wasn't their fault.
それよね。やる気がない、政府がやる気がない。日本政府もう一度その原爆というその問題に関心を持ってね、対処しとりさすりゃこういうことはないの。
一番最初にあった8月に原爆が落ちて9月にはそういう報告を入れとるんだけど、しないことはないんだけど、それからほっといて25に歌っとるんだけどね、やりくれないんだけど結局親が死んであとどうなるかいうことだ。もうこれしかないわけで、この親のこれはね、原爆に関わらず戦争に関わらず一般のこの社会の中でね、いろいろ障害児持ってる親がおる。同じこと、原爆もそれらも同じこと、親が生きとるうちは親が見てやるけれど、親が死んだ後どうなるかという。
The government and nonprofit groups now provide some assistance to survivors. Narumi and Toshiko work in a kind of daycare factory, carrying out simple tasks along with young adults with disabilities unrelated to the bomb. Both Narumi and Toshiko can count to 10, but neither can subtract. Both become confused if you ask them about the war or the atomic bomb. But they know their way back home, and they know what friendship is. They will always be 8 years old. With the great majority of Japanese born after the war, the nation's young have grown up in prosperous times and have little interest in the past. Fewer and fewer people feel any connection to what happened in Hiroshima 60 years ago. And those who can tell the story won't be here much longer. Before he died, Mr. Omuta, the journalist who started the Mushroom Club, told me, "Japan is at a turning point, and I'm worried. When the survivors are gone, who will remind us of what can happen?" The most beautiful spot in Hiroshima is a cemetery called Mitaki on the outskirts of town. Many people came here after the bombing to escape the devastated city, to find loved ones, to pray, and to die. Their stories will never be heard. It is quiet in Mitaki, except for the sound of water.
During this time of reflection and remembrance, I would also like to mention the passing of longtime president of the Friends of Hibakusha, Robert Bob Rusky, on November 2021. One of the last Zoom meetings he attended was during the planning of our 76th virtual Remembrance of Peace, commemorating Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His caring presence and leadership will truly be missed, and his spirit will continue to be with us as we join together to express our remembrances and deepest condolences to his wife Karen Kai and son Kulin.
We've set a station for the water pouring ceremony, and the clergy will begin the ceremony and demonstrate. The vessel that holds the cold water is designed to be small so that when you dip the dipper into the water, you have to take your time and watch what you're doing with your hand. So simply dip into the water vessel and pour it over the figurine of Sadako and the crane. The clergy will go first, and then they will be followed by Hibakusha, Friends of Hibakusha organization, the Japantown Cultural District, and so. Jack Dairiki is one of the survivors of the atomic bombing. Karen Kai's husband, Bob Rusky, late Bob Rusky, was president of the Friends of Hibakusha. Jerry Honda is an officer of the organization, the Friends of Hibakusha. Melissa Bailey Mihei is a member of the Japantown Cultural District staff. Jeffrey Matsuoka is the president of the Japanese American Religious Federation Housing Project, which owns Hinode Tower, Nihon Nachi Terrace, and Kokoro Assisted Living Facility. And now the public is invited to come forward as you are moved in your own heart and participate in your own personal offering of water in memory and in restoration of your commitment to peacemaking. And we will be standing there to assist you with the water pouring. Thank you all very much for participating with us, and we look forward to being in touch with you over the years to come. Amen. All right. This concludes our service.
On behalf of the organizing committee of today's event, we thank you for joining us for this truly memorable 77th anniversary commemoration of the atomic bombings. We appreciate you for logging on for today's virtual event to honor our last few remaining hibakusha.
We hope that their stories will continue to resonate throughout the world and will inspire us to be guardians for peace. We hope that their lasting legacy will help us avoid nuclear destruction by any means necessary. But to do so, it is up to all of us, and perhaps the descendants of the hibakusha, to carry their voices for peace throughout the coming generations. At a time when there is so much instability and tension throughout the world, it is all the more important for us to be vigilant so that the world does not have to face nuclear devastation ever again. Thank you.
Japanese that if you craft 1,000 cranes, if you are ill, you will be healed. And this is in memory of Steven Okazaki, who attempted to create 1,000 cranes because she suffered from the consequences of the atomic bomb. I learned that she had to make these cranes in Hiroshima from paper that was not available, from Band-Aid packages and hospital supplies, and the cranes became so small they were no bigger than my fingernail, and she had to make them with needles. But she was so courageous and so determined to live. She has become the symbol of all the children who were killed during the bombing of Hiroshima. August 6th. Yesterday, 1,000 cranes were flying.
In addition to 28 editions of the Nichibei Weekly throughout the year, a free San Francisco Japantown map and directory, a free wall calendar and discounts to events, members of the Nichibei will receive a very special new edition of the Japanese American Community Resource Guide. Your guide to Japanese America, the Japanese American Community Resource Guide, features a guide to hundreds of nonprofit organizations, Japantown maps and directories.
Cranes. It is believed by the Japanese that if you craft 1,000 cranes, if you are ill, you will be healed. And this is in memory of Soto Sasaki, who attempted to create 1,000 cranes because she suffered from the consequences of the atomic bomb. I learned that she had to make these cranes in Hiroshima from paper that was not available, from Band-Aid packages and hospital supplies, and the cranes became so small they were no bigger than my fingernail, and she had to make them with needles. And she was so courageous and so determined to live. She has become the symbol of all the children who were killed during the bombing of Hiroshima. August 6th. Yesterday, 1,000 cranes were flying. Hiroshima, your children still dying. And they said it saved many lives. The great white heat that shook flesh from bone, melted bone to dust, and they said it was merciful. Yesterday, 1,000 cranes were flying. Obachan, my grandmother, offered omame to her radiant Buddha, incense smoking miniature mushrooms, her lips moving in prayer for her sister they found tattooed to the ground, a fleshless shadow on Hiroshima soil. And they said, Nagasaki. Yesterday, a woman bore a child with fingers growing from her neck, shoulder empty. And they said, the arms race. Today, 1,000 cranes are flying, and inexpensive waiting rooms of Hiroshima, California, are blood counts sucked by the White Death. And they said it might happen again. Tonight, while everyone sleeps memoryless, the night wind flutters like 1,000 wings. How many ears will hear the whisper, Hiroshima, from a child's armless shoulder, puckered like a kiss?